Let's talk about Nicola Sturgeon. She is fighting to save her career right now after MSPs on a cross-party committee concluded that she had misled a Holyrood inquiry investigating her handling of the Alex Salmond allegations, which later led to a criminal investigation of which he was completely exonerated. A leaked section of the report from the Holyrood committee after investigating the evidence across the board, including hour upon hour of evidence from Nicola Sturgeon herself and Alex Salmond, the former First Minister, has concluded that Miss Sturgeon did give an inaccurate account under oath of a crucial meeting with Alex Salmond back in April 2018. They have concluded that she committed a potential breach of the ministerial code. They did, though, stop short of saying she did that knowingly, the normal threshold for resignation. So will she survive this? Well, let's talk to David Davis. He's a Conservative MP. He's also former Brexit Secretary. And earlier in this week, he used parliamentary privilege in Westminster to reveal some more details about this inquiry. Good morning to you, David.
Good morning.
Do you think, just first of all, whether or not Nicola Sturgeon will survive this, or do you think she will be forced to resign?
It depends a bit on, just in practical terms, it depends a bit on the finding of the ex-director of public prosecutions of the Irish state of Ireland, who is doing another investigation.
This is James Hamilton. He's the former director of public prosecutions in Ireland. He's got another independent report due to be published within days, possibly even as early as today.
That's right. And if that finds she's misled Parliament or she's broken the code, then I think the skids are under her. But as it stands at the moment, without that, she'll probably wriggle off the hook. And the issue here is whether it was deliberate or not. Whether this was an accidental misleading, because I don't think the committee had a choice about what it found, because there were, I think, 3 witnesses to this conversation.
But this is it. It wasn't a he said, she said, a conversation. Alex Salmond had claimed, he was, of course, her former First Minister, former leader of the SNP, and her mentor for many years. He came to her to say that there were these allegations and asked her for help, and she promised to act, he claims. She says she didn't. But there were 3 witnesses, at least one of whom we say is 100% independent, a civil servant, who corroborated his version of events rather than hers.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so, the committee would have had some difficulty in ignoring, a sort of 3-to-1 difference of view. And so one was a lawyer. Lawyers are pretty tightly bound in their professional requirements as well. So it was hard for them to avoid it. So the question then becomes whether it was deliberate or not. Now, what's interesting is her reaction to this, because she has just literally said they're wrong, and in other words, she's effectively restating what she said before. She's saying I was right. Now that's deliberate. Whether the original error was deliberate, neither here nor there. Her reaction today is deliberate. The smart thing for her to have done was to have got in front of Parliament and said, look, I made a mistake. It's a long time ago. Very difficult circumstances. As you say, my old mentor and a friend and so on. People would have interpreted it differently, but she didn't, and that would have been the smart thing to do.
But she's indicated that she won't resign, and instead argue that it's up to the Scottish people to give their verdict. And given that we have got those parliamentary elections in Scotland as soon as the 6th of May, we've only got one more week of the Scottish Parliament sitting next week, she can say, well, look, I'll let the Scottish people decide. But that's, of course, where it just becomes a hugely partisan battle. I mean, to a certain extent, it's already just partisan, isn't it? She said last night her reaction to this committee was that the people who voted on this committee to say that she had potentially breached the ministerial code were all non-SNP. The 4 SNP MSPs on the committee voted to back Nicola Sturgeon. So she said, everyone's already made up their minds beforehand, and she's right, isn't she? In terms of the public, those who've said that they now want her to resign or don't believe what Nicola Sturgeon had to say are largely people who want, for instance, don't vote SNP or certainly don't want independence. So this is just going to be the dividing line.
Well, what it means is it's going to be a significant issue in that election. I mean, you're right, to some extent, this is a polarisation around people, as it were, supporters and non-supporters of Nicola Sturgeon. But what's happened in the last week is that this row has started to have cut through with the public. You see, if we'd had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, even Scots listening would have been sort of not paying attention, But because it's very, very complicated, and their government line has been to really make things complicated and difficult and resist any information coming up whatsoever. But in the last week, people have suddenly thought, wait a minute, what's going on here? Has this lady been misusing her powers? Because she's incredibly powerful in Scotland. Has the Crown Office been misusing her? All of these things are now big politics in Edinburgh and Glasgow and the rest of Scotland.
Well, you raised a lot of this when you spoke in Westminster earlier this week, where you used parliamentary privilege, which was available to you as an MP in Westminster, but not in the Scottish Parliament, to actually reveal some text messages that were sent between some senior figures in Scotland. And again, it's, as you say, it's a very complicated story. And a lot of those figures who are being talked about aren't people who, most people have heard of. It's much easier to have a view on a story like, did Dominic Cummings drive to Barnard Castle, isn't it? I mean, just one person, something, did someone not drive somewhere? That's a scandal that most of us can get to grips with, with one sentence. This involves sort of reading 4 or 5 pages of documents before you've got a clue what's going on. But your big concern is this absence of the separation of powers in Scotland, and the fact that you've got, the chief executive of the SNP is married to the leader of the SNP, who's the first minister, who sits over a cabinet in which the man heading the Crown Office, effectively the Crown Prosecution Service, is also a member of the cabinet, and there is just no separation of powers in Scotland, and that's the fault of the government that set that up. I think you might have voted for that government.
No, I didn't vote for Gordon Brown's government, or indeed Tony
Okay,
Blair.
apologies.
But no, it is the fault of that, and there's a real fundamental problem here, and that is that Holyrood as a parliament is very weak. It doesn't have the powers that the Westminster Parliament has. It can't summon people to account. I mean, I've just discovered in the last 24 hours that Nicola Sturgeon's chief of staff apparently refused to give evidence to the committee in person. She gave written evidence, but refused to turn up to answer questions. Well, if that's the case, what sort of parliament is this? What sort of select committee is this that can't summon people who are fundamental to an inquiry is carrying out to give evidence?
Indeed. Can we also talk just briefly about what's happening in terms of the threats of over freedom of speech as well? The Spectator magazine, I think, really courageously standing up against these attempts to censor the information available to the public on this. They're now saying they're to all intents and purposes being threatened with huge court charges. And we're talking tens and hundreds of thousands of pounds even. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, this is part of the same problem. As you said, there's no separation of powers. People won't be necessarily familiar with that phrase. What that means is that the man who's chief prosecutor in Scotland is in the cabinet. Here we have the Director of Public Prosecutions, who can't be told what to do by the government. There they have the man actually in cabinet, and therefore he's subject to political pressures. What's happened is a thing called the Crown Office, which is their equivalent of our Crown Prosecution Service, has been rushing around bullying everybody to stop information going to the committee, to prevent things being published. And they stopped Alex Salmond's written evidence for the committee being put online, or they actually had it taken down, or parts of it taken down, by the Scottish Parliament. Well, the Spectator, as you say, quite courageously said, well, there's nothing wrong with this. It doesn't identify any complainants, which was the big issue. It doesn't do anything wrong, so we're going to put it online. And they did. They just redacted one paragraph to protect the name. Yeah. And they did that. And now, I mean, and actually the Crown Office didn't object. They went to court to get approval and so on. The Crown Office didn't say a word. Now, all of a sudden, they decided, this is difficult. It's politically problematic. And they're leaning on them to, as you say, with big financial threats.
It's very unhealthy. I think we'll have to summarise there.